Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers, editors, and occasionally agents, other folks around the publishing game, to learn about them and the work they do, and hopefully how their experiences may help you become a better writer, maybe even a published writer if you're not already. Before I introduce my guest, please take a moment and hit the subscribe button so you never miss a future episode. And if you like what you hear or you see today, please do me a solid, tell a friend. It is absolutely the best way for endeavors like this one to gain an audience. And nice reviews also great. I deeply appreciate either or. And honestly, if you don't like it, just keep it to yourself. Don't tell anybody. It's all good. Though I like to think you're going to like it because my guest today is the author of 10 psychological thrillers, several of which have been compared to the likes of folks like Kafka, David Lynch, several others. We're going to talk about that a little bit. His latest book, which came out last March, is called The Memory Ward, and it has been described as an examination of the nature of identity, trauma, and what it means to be human. Equally interesting to me is his own description of his work, which he describes as a battle where the author must, quote, grab an axe and show the story who's boss. With a mindset like that, and as someone who has been a professional writer and editor for many, many decades, who can totally relate to that, I just had to have him on the show today. So please welcome Jon Bassoff to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. I got my axe at my side.
Outstanding. Every good writer needs an axe, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Um, well, let's talk about the Memory War because that is the latest work. That's the one that came out last year. For the uninitiated, tell us a little bit more about that book.
Well, the book starts, it takes place in a kind of a quiet little idyllic town, white picket fences, green lawns, all of that. And the main character is a postal worker and just kind of living out his everyday happily delivering mail. One night he can't sleep, and so he comes downstairs to grab a drink of water. He leaves his wife upstairs, and as he's drinking his glass of water, someone starts pounding on his window, and it's a woman he's never seen before. Against his better judgment, he opens up the window. And she says, listen, I need to tell you something. I need to give you a warning. I know you don't know who I am, but I know who you are. And she says, the warning that I need to give you is don't trust anybody in this town, including your wife. They're all out to get you. And so that's how the book starts. And yeah, you talked about a little. It's got a little Lynchian stuff going on there. A lot of stuff with identities and switched identities and all of that. But pretty proud of it.
Yeah, that definitely has some Lynch and Kafka to it. The kind of the paranoia and the questioning of reality for sure. Um, well, as I noted, your work's been compared with folks like Kafka, Lynch, Ira Levin, but even folks like Dennis Lehane, who are not necessarily Kafka-esque. Anyway, those are all very heady comparisons, and I always wonder, how do you react when you read those kinds of comments? Is that I imagine it's kind of thrilling, but I know it would also be a little terrifying to me because it would feel like, oh my God, now I have to live up to something that I'm not sure I can do. How do you feel when you read comparisons like that?
Well, the first thing I always say is thanks, Mom, for those comparisons. But no, I write a lot of different type. Like I've never done any series. All my books are standalones, and I try to do different things each time. So I started more as somebody who was kind of in the crime fiction realm and a little bit more pulpy and noirish. And I think that's maybe where the Dennis Lehane stuff came in. Um, but I get bored easily, and so I try to write in a lot of different voices and a lot. Even though I consider myself a genre writer, I don't necessarily feel like I have a particular genre. There's elements of horror, there's elements of psychological thriller, there's elements of sci-fi, but it doesn't. Most of them don't fit neatly into it. Um, yeah, and if anybody compared me to Kafka, that's a ridiculous comparison because Kafka is probably my favorite author, and so it makes you feel good, but certainly not worthy.
Well, it's interesting you said that because I was going to ask you if, you know, I assumed you had read some of those people, and I was going to ask you, about um, the kinds of things that influence you as a writer. And I know no writer wants to copy even their hero, but we are all influenced by the types of uh, writers that we read, and maybe whether it's a turn of a phrase or how they turn a phrase or how they develop plots or what have you. Obviously, you said Kafka's your favorite. What was the thing, I guess, maybe that influenced you most from him?
Yeah, and when I say Kafka's my favorite, then I could say seven others who are my favorite as well. But my when I first started writing, I wasn't, I'd written some short stories when I was a little kid, but I wasn't really much of a reader in high school and so forth. I did some reading in college, obviously. When I got out of college, I was introduced to this writer named Jim Thompson, who is see you nodding your head, so you know who he is. Jim Thompson,
Oh yeah.
a kind of a pulp writer from the 50s and 60s, and the first book I read of his was called The Killer Inside Me, which was told from the point of view of a sheriff, which is, kind of typical for crime novels, except for his sheriff was a complete psychopath. And I had never read anything like it. I didn't even know you could do that. I didn't know you could write a story from the point of view of somebody who's sociopathic. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And so the first book I ever tried writing was really just a complete ripoff of Jim Thompson. It was completely derivative and thankfully never saw the light of day, but it kind of got me into the mode of the discipline of sitting down and actually writing a book. And Thompson still remained a pretty big influence in a lot of my writing. But then, I remember then the next manuscript I worked on, I had just read some Camus. I had read The Stranger, and I was like, all right, I want to do that. And so my next book was a ripoff of Camus. And it took me a while. It took me maybe three or four manuscripts until I think the combining of my influences and the imitating of my influences, I did it badly enough that it started to become my own voice. And so, you put a little Camus, you put a little Kafka, you put a little Jim Thompson, a little Flannery O'Connor, and you're trying to imitate all those people and not doing a very good job at it. And then eventually you develop your own voice. And so I finally got something that I felt like, all right, this is something that's not derivative that I can work with.
Man, I can so relate because I read every word Tony Hillerman ever wrote,
Yeah.
and Walter Mosley too for quite a long time. And I think the first manuscript I wrote was, yeah, probably like I say probably about as bad an imitation of Tony in particular as could be done. And of course, over the years, thankfully, yeah, I like to think maybe I found my own voice too. But it takes a little while. You kind of got to write that stuff out of your system because it's what you know to some extent, and it feels comfortable. Like at least it did for me to do
Yeah,
that. But you're never going to sell any of that.
no, but I do think it's, when you're starting, I think it's a good exercise to, you take these brilliant writers, and it's not a bad thing. It's kind of like the artists in museums who will, take one of those incredible portraits and then imitate it themselves, and you kind of learn how to paint that way. And so that's kind of how I learned to write, I guess.
Yeah. Well, your work, I've seen it described so many ways, speculative fiction, kind of dark noir. Um, you know, I guess what do you think about labeling? Because you said yourself you don't do series. You like to explore a lot of different ideas. But we're in an industry that really wants to put you in a box that makes it easy for them to market and to sell. How do you see your work and how do you feel about your work being labeled in any way?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I know it's labeled as, a way to figure out where to put things in bookstores and where to sell things on Amazon, and just to kind of give the readers some idea of what they're getting into. But like I had a book, not this previous one, but the one before that, called Beneath Cruel Waters, which was, I think they just put it in there as a thriller, and it wasn't, there's no chases, it just seemed very far from a thriller to me. And so, and then sometimes I would be asked to go to some little conventions or whatever with other thriller writers, and I just didn't feel like my stuff fit at all there. Um, so I feel like I have more connections in like I feel like in the horror genre and the sci-fi genre that I have some kinship there. But it's true, my stuff doesn't fall neatly into either of those things. I've never written a book with any supernatural stuff going on, which is, probably most horror today.
Yeah.
Um, I would just say, when people ask me, my stuff is really dark. My stuff is really weird. Is kind of the best way I could describe it. And I'm sure my agent and my publisher would love it if it fit a little more neatly into some of those genres. But um, I just write what I'm going to write.
Well, now you're a high school teacher by trade,
Yeah,
and I say where you've noted that you are known by both your students and administration, fellow teachers, etc., as the quote unquote deranged writer guy.
yeah.
Uh, Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, first of all, are you comfortable with that as a moniker, number one? And second of all, I mean, does it help you at all, like keep order in the classroom or anything? And people coming in going, well, hey, this guy's, deranged, right?
Well, I always tell I have a creative writing class, and whenever I'm explaining the difference to them between, the writer and the narrator, I always tell them, look, my narrators have killed dozens of people. I've only killed three. And so usually that gets them to sit back a little bit and give me a little bit more respect. But no, it's actually been it's been wonderful being a teacher and a writer, and I think some of the students could care less, but some of them it gives you a little built-in ethos and respect that they know that you're kind of practicing what you preach there as writers. But I do have, I'll have other teachers or admin come up and say, "Oh, I saw the weirdest thing at this shop, and I thought of you," no matter what it is. So. Like I think it was a couple days ago, a teacher said, I found this alligator purse, and on the alligator purse was an actual dead alligator, and I thought of you. So yeah, anytime there's something weird, they look my way.
Well, that's a nice mark to have with students. I know from remembering my own teenage years, that would have probably resonated with me. Um, I think every writer also dreams of having their work made into a movie or a TV series. And I understand that two of your books, The Drive-Through Crematorium and The Disassembled Man, have been optioned for movies. I also know from talking to so many other writers that have been in that situation that it is anything but a simple, easy, or straightforward process. How is it going for you on that front?
Well, yes, not simple at all. So I mean, I'll talk about The Disassembled Man. The Disassembled Man was the first novel that I ever had published, and it was optioned, I want to say about 15 years ago, initially. And somehow it's kind of just managed to bop around from producer to producer, and we've had several different directors who have been attached to it. We've had different talent that's been attached to it. Um, and especially in the independent film, it's just so hard to get everything to come together at
Yeah.
the right time. So right now, like, we've got an actor who I feel good about. We've got a director. It would be his debut. I feel good about. We've got financing. Not a huge film, but a couple $1 million, which is enough to make something. And they say they're gonna try to film it this summer. But I also know that they can say whatever they want. So until they actually have a filming date on the calendar, I refuse to believe it. But there's a chance it'll happen, and it would be a lot of fun just because to write a book and to have your vision is one thing, where you've got from your imagination to the page, and then other people are reading your imagination. But to have kind of a whole crew of people interpreting your work and putting on the screen, I think for any author would be a pretty cool thing to have happen. So So I'm hoping. And then the memory ward was there was some interest from some executives over at Fox, and so they're poking around with that. But again, I know those things, the chances of it happening are very, very slim.
Um, on the first one, were you able to have any input into anything, whether it was the screenwriting or any other aspect of the production?
Yeah, I actually ended up writing the screenplay. So when it was first optioned, it was optioned by a screenwriter, and he wrote the script. And there was several years where it kind of didn't go anywhere. And at some point, I had talked to this producer, and he said, "Hey, John, you should just, write your own screenplays. It's not that hard, based on your own book. And then you get to skip that middleman. Then there's one less person who's going to split the money with you, one less person you have to worry about." And so I went ahead and wrote the screenplay for The Disassembled Man, along with a couple others. So there's that input, and they've been good as far as like touching base with me when they're reaching out a particular director or a particular actor. So they'll ask my opinion. I don't know if they care about my opinion, but they'll at least go through and ask me about it. So um, I probably contact them more than they contact me, saying, "Hey, anything new? Anything new?" And then they'll say no or just not respond. But yeah, it's the publishing industry is really, really hard. The film industry is seems to be 10 times harder.
Yeah, it's really crazy. Years ago, I had a friend, so just somebody I met at a writers' conference, who had a memoir that she wrote about when she and her first husband split up. She lived in upstate Michigan, and just the effort that she went through with three kids to hold on to this farm that they lived on. And money was incredibly tight. It was just really, really a tough thing to do, but she
Mhm.
did it and came through the other side and eventually remarried and has had a great life. She's a great investigative reporter, has won many awards and everything. But this was early on, right? So there's a big international film festival in her city that she lives outside, a closest city to her. And apparently Rachel Weisz was coming to this, the actress, for anyone who doesn't know who that is, uh, was coming to this film festival, and her assistant was going through the airport, saw the book on the bookshelf, picked it up, started reading it, couldn't put it down, and so they ended up optioning the book multiple times. The option kept expiring, and then they are getting right to expiration, and then they would re-up it, right? And this
Yeah.
happened like 4 or 5 times. And she said she made vastly more money from the options than she ever did from the sale of the book.
Yeah.
And I said, well, Marty, you're probably like the one person in the world who can say that, but it just goes to show you it doesn't, it is such a crapshoot. It's like the NFL draft. You don't have the slightest idea if any of this is going to work out until, something, cameras start rolling and, you
Yeah,
know,
it's funny. Well, a couple of things that pop into my mind. There was a an Irish writer, Ken Bruin. I don't know if you're familiar with Ken Bruin. He passed away a couple years ago, but he had had a few of his books optioned, and somebody asked him, how important is it that that they're true to your book, that they stay on script, and he says, I don't. They can make a musical out of it. I don't care if they want to do it, just make the movie. And then Paul Tremblay, I think it was Paul Tremblay, who's a horror writer, talked about the difference between publishing and films, and he says in publishing it's always no, 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 no till it's yes, and in film it's always yes, 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 yes till it's no. So they're in film they're always telling you, hey, this is going to happen. We can get this guy, we can get that guy. I mean the names that they've talked about for some of my books, um, just like huge big stars, and then when you first start, you're so excited because they're throwing these names out, and then eventually you realize, I don't think this is, I think this is them just kind of playing this game or something. And um, there's been a lot of yeses, and I'm just waiting for that final no.
right. Well, oops, sorry. I know that a lot of your books deal with things like memory loss, memory distortion, and you've called that an obsession for you. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, why is that? And then maybe you can also tell me a little bit about, you know, how you use that as a vehicle for storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few. So I mentioned that I don't have any series, and my books don't are all kind of standalones. But I do have. I repeat the obsessions that I have, and I forget who it was, but somebody. I don't think it was an author. It might have been Bruce Springsteen, the singer, who said, your job is to try to get people to care about your obsessions, and so that's my job. And one of my obsessions. A lot of my books deal with violence. A lot of them deal with uh, childhood trauma that is repressed. And for me, it's not like I'm overcoming a ton of demons. I have a few of them, but it's more. I've always just thought it's kind of a cool literary device, and especially from somebody who came up in sort of the film noir and the pulp era, that was always kind of, you think about some of those post-World War II film noirs where the soldier comes back and his memories are shattered in some way, or the woman with amnesia and so forth. And there's a lot of cool things you can do with that. When I was, I think, about 13 or 14 years old, I saw the Mickey Rourke movie Angel Heart that had Robert De Niro, a movie that deals with memory or loss of memory or identity. And when I saw that movie at such a young age, it was like it stuck with me. And it was something then when I started writing that I was always fascinated with because, memory in some way defines who we are, but it's so unreliable and it's shifting all the time. And the things that we thought we knew about ourselves, we don't always know. And so I think it's a good device for the type of, psychological, suspenseful novels that I write.
Well, I will tell you, I agree about that movie. That movie, absolutely. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's Lisa Bonet, Mickey Rourke, Robert De Niro. If you want a twist ending, boy, you got it. I'm not going to say anything more than that. It
Yeah.
is absolutely spellbinding, I think. I think it was really one of the really great movies of its era. Highly
No,
recommend that.
I've always been surprised that not more people know about it, because
Oh
I
my
do feel
goodness,
like
I
it's such a
know.
masterpiece.
There's another great movie too that I honestly, this is classic because I saw it in the middle of the night. I used to have, when I first started out, I was writing on a news team for a TV station and I had the overnight shift. So I'd go to work at 1 in the morning. And so I would often, as I'm getting ready to go to work, as my wife and my daughter were asleep, I'd be watching TV. So I would watch movies and stuff like that, whatever was on. And this is in the early 1990s, so that era. But there was a movie called Spellbinder
Hmm.
that was got Timothy Daly and oh God, John Travolta's late wife. Names going
Oh,
out of my head right now, but
yeah.
and it deals with a coven of witches. And that's all I can say that without giving up something. But what an incredibly great, the movie title is perfect. It is a spellbinder. And I've watched it again since then. And even knowing what's coming, you're like, oh my goodness. And to me, that makes such great psychological stuff, right? It
Yeah.
really does pull you in, whether you're reading it or whether you're watching it. Those are things that are just if you can keep people on the edge of their seat even when they know what's coming, that's or feel like they know what's coming.
Well,
That's really a great
I just put
thing.
it on my list to watch, Spellbinder with Kelly Preston.
Kelly Preston, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
she was excellent. There's a lot of great character actors in there that anybody who, especially if you've watched any 70s TV, you'll recognize people like Audra Lindley, who most people remember from uh, Three's Company, but
Hmm.
others like that. Highly
Yeah.
recommend. Um, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about something else you said, which was you've called writing painful and a chore. And believe me, I can relate. Again, I've been writing words for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, and especially, I think sometimes when you're sitting down to write your own, like, your creative things. Tell me a little bit about that. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing for an awful long time. I've been doing this for, I guess I wrote my first manuscript was about 27 years ago. So I've been doing it for a while. And I'm a disciplined person, which helps as a writer. Um, but it's still painful. Like you think after having 10 novels published and that like it would get easier and easier, but it really doesn't. I'm still filled with self-doubt every single time I write it is and when you're trying new things too, if you're writing a series, you kind of have your formula, you know what works, you know what your audience is, and it's a little less scary. But if every single time you're writing something new, that self-doubt is going to creep in there, which is difficult. And for me, the hardest part of writing is I'm kind of an outliner. I like planning things out beforehand, but for me, that's the toughest part too, where you're trying to conceptualize this entire novel. It's like if you're going rafting and trying to figure out where all the currents are going to be 2 miles down the road and trying to figure out all that stuff at the beginning. And so those are when I'm planning out the stories, there's a lot of like lying in bed at night and staring at the ceiling as I'm trying to get the ideas in place. And then the writing itself is, it's just hard work. Just motivating yourself to sit in front of the screen and to write and know that a lot of times what you're writing isn't going to be that great. The thing I do love in writing is the going back and the revising. When you've got something already there, you've got something on paper, um, like a sculptor, at least having the clay there and having a shape there that you can kind of manipulate and make into better shape is the part of writing that I enjoy. And then the best part of writing is being done with it, and
Yeah.
I love the feeling of being done with a book, and I love the feeling of getting it published and having people read it. And unfortunately, the only way you can ever be done with a book is by going through the really hard process of actually writing it.
Yeah. Well,
So
and I think a lot of writers do create series because no writing of any book is ever easy. I don't even want to hint that that's what I mean. But when you don't have to recreate the character and all that development every single time, that's a slightly easier path than when you're having to create everything from whole cloth again. And so that is why I think a lot of writers, especially in mystery and crime, we tend to
yeah, and
think more
yeah,
that
and
way.
again, I don't want it to ever seem like I'm like dismissing them because I know there's all sorts of other challenges with that of making it
Sure.
fresh and bringing unique plots every time. I just tend to get kind of sick of my characters after the book, and especially my characters. A lot of them are kind of psychopaths, so you can only live with one psychopath for so long. So I'm always ready to invite a new psychopath into my
I
house.
I had an author on the show a while back who had uh, written a very long series with one predominant character, and I asked him about, had essentially kind of what you said, where, did he ever find himself where, he was repeating himself? And he said, oh yeah, there's times I've written a paragraph or something that I thought was great, and then I hand it off to my editor, and she says, "Yeah, it was great the first time you used it back in book three, right?"
Yeah,
Because that's the way our brains work. Hey, that's really great.
yeah.
We tend to forget that thing, so yeah, that can be a challenge, I'm sure. I wanted to ask you because one of your novels, Corrosion, got translated into French and German, and it actually got nominated for a really prestigious award in France, the Grand Prix Literature Policière. I hope I said that right.
That sounds good.
Um,
Yeah.
the I'm because I asked you a little bit about this earlier too, about the comparisons when people make like a really heady comparison. Same question maybe about awards or even being considered for awards, because I know you also wrote another screenplay for not for one of your books, but that also went very far in contests and was considered. I mean, those kinds of things, I think all of us as writers, we just long for that kind of recognition. Same question, I guess maybe was earlier about the comparisons. Does that, how do you respond to that as a writer? I mean, and where I'm going with that is, I think sometimes, I wonder if it changes us psychologically when we go to write the next thing. Are we somehow now thinking, "Oh, I have to do this because of this," or did it affect you in any way with
Yeah.
your
Well, I
writing?
mean, thankfully, I have not been nominated for a ton of awards, so I haven't had to deal with that too often. But yeah, it was funny. Like the book got published in French, and in a way, when that happens, you feel kind of isolated from what's going on over there because it's another country. So you don't really get to read it, reviews or anything like that because it's all in a foreign language. And they flew me out to France for a tour, which was incredible. It was like a 5 city tour over 9 days or 7 city tour or something. And France is very different than the United States as far as their love of literature, especially of like noir type writing that I do. They really treat you like royalty out there. Like they really revere their authors, which I haven't found as much the case here. But yeah, my publisher put it up for this award, and it did end up getting nominated. It didn't win. The best thing about it was that it kind of opened up some other doors because then when you start pitching some of your other projects, you can say, "Hey, this was not this. My last book was nominated for this and that." Which helps out. But there is always that, like, if you have, and I don't think it's necessarily just awards, but if you have some success with something or people like a particular book, it's just human nature to say, well, I kind of need to do that again then. I need to write that book again. Um, the interesting thing is sometimes the way publishing works, you finish a book and it doesn't come out for a couple years after you've finished writing it, and by that time you're writing something new, and you have no idea how that other book is going to do. So in my experience, a book's getting published, I start a new book that is totally different, and then maybe that other book starts doing well, and I say, "Oh shoot, I should have done, Corrosion Part 2 instead of doing this one that I did instead." But I think it's a mistake anytime you start chasing after things, when you start chasing after a market, when you start chasing after awards. I don't think that works very well. And so I think my philosophy has always been write what I would want to read. I write the books that I would want to read, and hopefully there'll be at least some sort of an audience. I've never gotten a huge audience, but I have at least a decent size audience who will read some of my books. And then if any of those awards come or if any of the platitudes come, then you say great. But chasing doesn't it's never worked for me, and I don't think it works for a lot of people.
I was going to ask you a completely different question, but you just said something that I really want to follow up on because I have talked with some writers who have now this is primarily in the case where they have a series
Yeah.
that is connected with an audience. But sometimes, at least one of the folks that I'm thinking of right now has multiple different standalones as well. Point being is that they have a readership for their work,
Hmm.
and of at the toward the second half of their career, they've gone more into self-publishing, even though they've been traditionally published with big houses, because they felt they had enough of an audience. They probably maxed out that audience with through the traditional publishing world and felt like, hey, I can actually keep my audience, spend a little more money, my own money up front on all the things that it takes to publish, but then make a lot more money on the back end.
Hmm.
Um, has that something that's ever occurred to you to since you feel like, hey, I've got an audience, let me just take care of this myself?
Yeah, I don't think my audience would be big enough. I totally understand. Like if you get to a certain point, where you are become a brand name, where people are going to buy your book no matter what. I can see it making sense going into the self-publishing, but for me, it's kind of been the reverse. Where I started out, my books were all published by very small presses, micro presses in some cases, where you just got like the mom and pop, just a couple people behind. And in some ways, it was great because they published most of whatever it is that I wrote. I was able to write some really dark, weird, twisted stuff that I don't think would have been published with the big publishers. But your audience was fairly limited because I wasn't a known quantity, I wasn't a known name. So it's been a battle to work to get the agent to move up to the next press. So, my last couple books have been published with Blackstone Publishing, which is kind of more of a mid-sized publisher. It's still not one of the big ones, but it's big enough that that, the books have presence in Barnes and Nobles and have pretty good distribution. And I feel really, really happy at that level, where there's still it's a small enough publishing house where they still give you attention and care about you and give your book the attention it deserves. But it's also not small enough where it just gets kind of forgotten in the cracks. And as much as I love the small presses, almost every small press I've worked with eventually is folded, and then it
Yeah.
becomes another issue. Like, recently a press that had six of my backlist books folded, and so they're homeless right now. And thankfully, Blackstone is going to be reissuing them shortly. So no, for me, there will be no plans of doing that. Never say never. If something happened, the movie thing happened, and all of a sudden it became big, but I really don't expect that to be in the cards.
Yeah. Um, really quickly, because every writer deals with bad reviews, and I think I ask this of everyone that comes on the show. Um, do you read your reviews, and if so, how do you deal with bad ones?
Yeah. I read them less now than I used to. When I first started out, I think when I started, there were fewer reviews, so you were just kind of more interested in the ones that came out. I had on my that book, The Disassembled Man, one of the very first reviews that came out was like the nastiest, meanest, and it felt like personal, like a mean-spirited review. And I mean, you feel like you've been punched in the solar plexus. It's just hard to breathe because it's not just a product. It's a year of hard work. It feels like they're going after your identity as a person and as a creative person. I still like if this gets made into a movie, I still feel the urge. I don't think I will, but of like finding that reviewer and saying, see, I told you, you
Right?
got it wrong. Um, I will, when a book comes out, my publisher sometimes will send things along when like if Publishers Weekly or Kirkus or something reviews it, then I'll read it and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not good. And it's always disappointing when they're not. As far as Goodreads, I've learned just to kind of stay off of it. Occasionally I'll look on there just to see numbers and so forth, but anytime you start going into the reviews, not much good can happen out of it. You'll read a great review and think, ah, man, what an incredible writer I am, and then 30 seconds later, you get a one-star review and want to drown yourself. So better to let the reviews be for the readers and not get all hooked up on it. And even though I say that, I'm not perfect. There's definitely times when you'll feel the urge just to see what people are saying, but it's usually not a good idea.
You know, I've just come to the conclusion, and look, I'm an editor of a publication that covers the California State Capitol. My regular readers know this, or listeners know this. Um, And I've just come to the conclusion that there's just some people in this world are just fucking mean, and they enjoy being mean,
Yeah.
and they don't care whose feelings they hurt, and they don't have any consideration. I mean, I wish that wasn't true, but it doesn't matter what realm you're in. I happen to be kind of in, in the political world, but I was in the blue collar world for many years at the beginning of my working life, and I've just seen it from beginning to end. You just go, there are just 20% of, I felt like Seinfeld, 20% of the world's undateable, but 20% of the people out there they're just mean, man. I don't know why they take such joy in crapping all over somebody else, and especially in the creative world, when you just feel like so many of these people, couldn't draw a stick figure, but they would criticize Van Gogh to the end of the earth, right? You're just like,
Yeah.
what is wrong with you?
Well, and I think sometimes it's, especially like on Goodreads, it's not reviewing the quality of your book, it's reviewing, which I get how much they liked it, but sometimes they're just the criticism is that this isn't the book that I wanted to read. I wanted something else. And, fair enough, but it's not the book that I wrote. And obviously, reviewing is extremely subjective and there's not going to be any books that everybody is going to love and you just kind of have to take that. But yeah, your point is well taken too. There are just trolls out there, and especially now, I think it's increased because you get more attention for it, and
Yeah.
people who sometimes feel a little bit powerless, it's a nice way to gain some power is just by ripping on somebody else who's done the work.
Yeah, sadly. So I do mean this as a serious question because I love this. Because you've described yourself as, quote, a connoisseur of tequila,
Mm.
hot sauces, psychobilly music, and Fleabag motels. I love that. In order, what's your favorite of each? And I'm really particularly interested in both the tequila and the Fleabag motels. What's your favorite of each of those?
Well, when I say that I'm a connoisseur of tequila, I would say that I just enjoy drinking it, but as far as like um being a high class, understanding all the brands and all the, reposado and all that, I'm not much good at that. I will say for Fleabag motels, I don't stay in them very often, but I enjoy driving by and taking pictures of them and so forth. There's a sweet one here in Longmont, Colorado, where I live, called the Lamplighter Motel, which is just, full of character. It's got a little, what is the bar right next to it? Forget the bar's name next to it, but it's if you ever come to Longmont, you got to stay at the Lamplighter. There's one in Tucson called the No-Tell Motel, which I always enjoy. And then as far as hot sauces are concerned, I'll go local. There's one called Harry's Habanero here in Colorado, which is delicious. I love habanero hot sauces. So, and then as far as like Psycho Billy, I like the Cramps. Old school. I like the
Okay.
Cramps, which is a kind of a post-punk band from
Yeah.
the 80s. There's another one called Demented Argo, which are excellent. Uh,
Okay. Okay.
so
Learning something here. I'm not familiar with them. Okay.
yeah. So when I say I'm a connoisseur, it doesn't mean you should listen to me, but
Well, I'm not sure there's that many connoisseurs we should listen to about anything, really, because
that's
I mean
that's true.
everything's very subjective, right? At the end of the
Yeah.
day. Um, yeah, I was trying to really too with like what was psychobilly because I remember I don't know if you remember this a few years back. Country punk became kind of a big thing in music for a short time. And
Yeah.
there was a band I really liked called Slobberbone, and I
Hmm.
have no idea if they're still around or not, but
I like the name.
just yeah, yeah, just the idea of country punk and it intrigued me for a little bit and I heard some of their music and so I have some of it in my in on my iPhone, but
Yeah, well, like Psychobilly doesn't, I mean, it still exists. I don't think but it's certainly gone out of style. There's not a lot of new Psychobilly. It's mainly stuff from the 90s and the 80s, so forth.
yeah, yeah. Well, in the end I always go back to the Beatles and the Stones anyway, so
Well, you can't go wrong.
no, it can't go wrong. Well, okay, well, I like to end things always with a question that I hope is fun. I mean for it to be fun, a little thought provoking, maybe give folks a little insight into more insight, I guess, into you. Let's just say I'm omnipotent. I can put you together with any one of these three people for whatever you want. Some tequila, listen to some music, whatever, talking about creative things. Who would you choose and why? That's the question. And the options I'm going to give you are, and there's always a through line here. Most people figure out my through lines very, very quickly. I'm sure you will too. But Alfred Hitchcock, Shirley Jackson, or Stanley Kubrick.
Hmm.
One of those three people I could put you together with to hang out with, talk shop with. Who would you choose and why?
Oh, geez. All three are so good. Um, I would probably go with Stanley Kubrick. I love all three of those, and I love Shirley Jackson is incredible, so she would probably be my number two. Um, but the thing that impresses me so much about Stanley Kubrick is there's not many directors or writers out there who you see it and you know it right away. That's who it is. That they're so distinct. Um, and I know that Kubrick gets criticized for being, distant and cold and so forth. But for me, that's what makes it so brilliant. And um, The Shining is still my favorite horror movie of all time, I would say. So I would love to talk to Kubrick just to talk shop, to talk about um, how you make your vision kind of iconic as he has done. And plus, I would love to get the stories about like just the shoot of The Shining, all those stories of him torturing Shelley Duvall, how much of that was real, how much of that has become kind of urban myth and so forth. And but I don't want to have it both ways, but talking to Shirley Jackson too, because she is one of the most understated writers who's able to create absolutely terrifying situations too. I wish I could do that and would love to pick her brain about that too.
For anyone who missed the through line, I mean, obviously it's the psychological aspect of the work of all three of those. Hitchcock, Shirley Jackson, and Stanley Kubrick were masters of the psychological aspect of storytelling, even across all kinds of genres in each of their specific genre. Just really, I'm with you on Kubrick. I'm a huge fan of Kubrick. Almost everything he's ever done. Just maybe not as much Eyes Wide Shut. The rest of his stuff, I think, was
True,
was,
true.
was
Yeah.
really spectacular stuff. So good. So I concur with your choice, sir.
Thank you.
Well, folks, like I say, first of all, big thanks to Jon Bassoff for coming on the show today to talk about his career in writing and all the things around publishing and especially around psychological creativity. I think it's all really fascinating stuff. I hope you did too. As I said, if you enjoyed the show, subscribe, maybe leave us a decent review. It does help other people find us. Also, if you don't mind, like say, tell a friend. Or, I was kind of kidding, but if you didn't like the show, well, okay, just keep that to yourself. That's okay too. But I hope you liked the show because I know I certainly had a good time. John, I hope you did too. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, great
Uh,
time. Great time.
Absolutely, Paul. Hang in there. We will see you all next time on the open mic, writers in their own words. But I almost forgot my sign off, which is, tomorrow's not promised to any of us. So whatever you do, please make today count. Next time on the open mic, writers in their own words.